Without further ado, on that note, back to the actual people you've come to hear about. It's Angela Morgan here. Now, I've had the benefit of hearing Angela talk before and having met with her in person as well. And I'm sure by the end of the session you'll agree with me when I say that she has the most contagious enthusiasm for history in general, for the walking of the streets which bring the history to life, and a credible ability to story tell. Is that a verb? Probably not. To tell stories, right, of the lives of the remarkable people who once trod the streets and the boards even we're doing today. And I think the encouragement of looking up, looking down, looking sideways, seeing things differently, I think will really be an eye-opening experience. It's not lost on me that we're here talking not exclusively but principally perhaps about Francis Barber, who joined this household as a mere boy, who would have walked through the house as you've done today, and who we know spent time in this very, very room whilst Johnson's writing the dictionary, whether or not it's on this desk or not. You see the product of his work here. And at the same time, Barber's learning his literacy skills. He's improving them, not only in English but in other languages. He's learning to read and write in this very room. And there's something really quite remarkable about hearing an expert like yourselves talk about this man and putting into context the life of others as well, remarkable people of African descent that we can really celebrate in the streets of London, in the Fleet Street Quarter itself. So please could you join me in welcoming Angela.
Thank you very much. I have only 30 minutes. And normally when I speak, I thought my enthusiasm means I go on for longer, so I've had to put myself into one of those sort of straitjackets of writing things down. So it might feel a bit staid, but don't worry, my enthusiasm will shine through when you find me going slightly off-piste, but I have to be mindful of the time and equally 30 minutes, I'm already losing some of those 30 minutes just talking. But the one thing I have to say to you that I have to thank Fleet Street Quarter, because they gave me a chance to do a lunchtime walk around the city. Lunchtimes for busy people in the city basically means grab a sandwich, get back to the desk. And this was an opportunity, because we were in the month of October, to look at somebody in terms of Black history. And I just want to say to you, Black history is British history, so the two cannot be separated. But it was that opportunity to come back to a little part of the City of London, Fleet Street, and walk and say, what can I do in this area that will enable me to show off what is the history of this city, and equally include people of colour and African descent or even Caribbean descent. And one was the obvious one of being Francis Barber. But then, as I walked around, there were other things that I found that you will also discover in terms of the people that were in these areas that hadn't got a name. They're anonymous, but their circumstances are very much sort of documented in a general way. And I want to give that to you as well. But also to encourage you, and I was looking at you, and I've already done my sort of assessment of you all, to say that yes, you're people that live here in London or just outside of London, interested in history, and more than likely know more than I know. All right, so I'm going to give you my insight into what I did in terms of that walking tour, but doing it in a way that I've written it down so that you can see where I'm going. And some of the pictures that you will see here is where I'm taking on a little walk that you can do yourself. All right, and you might find a little side alley and go down it and find something there that I haven't seen. So it's encouraging people to love London, love it in a way that you may well see all these high-rise buildings going up, but behind those high-rise buildings, down on the streets, up in the air, there are something that will prick your curiosity, and hopefully you'll go and say, what's that? I've never seen that before. It's been there all the time. It's just that moment that you've seen it. Go and look for it, go and find it. And I'm going to say to you, my talk today, because it's 30 minutes, is light. I don't feed people, I encourage you to go and feed yourself, all right, and learn more. And I'll also introduce a book that is also on sale downstairs that would help you understand a little bit more about Francis Barber, who is known as Frank to Samuel Johnson. So, if I'm doing this right, yeah, do I prep? That's it, got it. We're working, technology is not my friend. But just to say, this is the picture. Now downstairs in the parlour there is another picture of Francis Barber. very different to this one. This one, in a way, sort of lends itself to some of the descriptions of Francis Barber of a clear-skinned man. The one downstairs is of a darker-skinned man, but not painted by the famous Joshua Reynolds. And if you look, you can see the list here of valuable paintings that were going on sale. And one of them there is Omai, I think that's in the National Portrait Gallery. And then the other, Francis Barber, a Negro servant of the late Dr. Samuel Johnson. And one of the things when it's looking at a picture like this is of the way people saw black people. And when they started to dress them up and put them into portraits, the overarching sort of understanding was these are noble savages, because they weren't seen as people in a way that they were part of a society. They had their place. We use them as we choose to use them, and if we don't, we then discard them. And in a way, Francis Barber, you're going to learn, might seem that he's a noble savage, but in a way, by being with Samuel Johnson, he had I would say, a better life than some of the servants, and that's the phrase that would be used, of enslaved people. So I'm going to start reading just to get through. So this is the introduction. Faithful Frank just lived off Fleet Street, and he's better known as Francis Barber, who was the black servant to Dr. Samuel Johnson, the creator of a version of the English dictionary. His life has been documented by others using a compilation of comments and observations made by the friends of Dr. Johnson. Not all were favourable. He would have been referred to as Francis, Frank, the blackamoor, Blackie, the Ethiopian, or the doctor's Negro servant. And by Johnson's biographer, James Boswell, who, you see the book, Life of Johnson, he was referred to as Honest Francis. But his life story is mixed in with other black men and women of the 18th century London, and that will help frame what his life was like when he wasn't in Dr. Johnson's purview. So we have this picture here. We're going to look at the next picture, giving a little bit more, so you can see it a bit more, and look at that chin and how he's seen, as I said, that noble man. So you're looking at this picture, as I said, that could be him, because they didn't always identify black people in their paintings. They were just there. If you go to the Tate Britain and the National Gallery, you'll see people that are fairly anonymous, but they're playing a part, the story that is being told with them in it. But if you look at the picture again, all right, this is said, there are many examples. When you go downstairs, you'll see the one that has been done has made him look more, when I say more black, more Negro in his features. This is a sort of between, in terms of that he could well be a mixed race, but it is a painting that many people have copied and done different things to. Now, so what we're going to be doing, as I said, I do a walk. I like walking, I like going around, so I want to sort of take us on part of that walk from Dr. Johnson's home here. This wasn't his only home, this is where he met Francis. So what I want to do is to sort of take you through much of where, do you know what, let me go back a bit. I've just missed something, that's what I like reading. So I want to go back and talk about how he and Dr. Johnson met. So Frank was introduced to Dr. Johnson, who came with his owner, Colonel Bathurst, who had brought the boy from his estate in Jamaica, and I've seen where it was. It was called the Orange Estate on the north coast of Jamaica. And possibly he brought him with the intention of serving as the young servant boy. His life in Jamaica remains sketchy, but from what has been learned, it is likely that he was brought up to serve the plantation owner in his house rather than be working on the fields. So therefore, he was suitable for work here in the household and possibly would understand what was required of him. But it would be a fortuitous meeting in this house where the Dr. Johnson was living, and he was grieving the recently deceased wife named Tatty. Frank, his original name was Kwashi, would eventually be taken in by Dr. Johnson, and he would be christened and given his new name of Francis Barber. It's not known if it's here in London or with Colonel Bathurst, but he is now known as Francis Barber. And during his time here in London, he would be exposed to other black people in servitude. And in some way, he could see that he would be enjoying a life where he's given more freedom, relatively more freedom, than those who are in servitude. And on the death of his former owner, Colonel Bathurst, he was given his freedom. And he was also bequeathed £12. A little bit of money there for him. And he seized the opportunity to forge a different path. And he used his inheritance with the idea of taking up a position as an apothecary's apprentice. Evidence shows that he wasn't successful because the city has its rules and didn't take in what we refer to as strangers, didn't take in black people, so he could not have gone to be an apothecary's apprentice. And also, the amount of money required to be an apprentice was more than £12. So he went and basically decided to go into the Navy. And this is when Dr. Johnson stepped in, because he was a young boy and he didn't want him to go to the Navy. Instead, he's slight and he has a problem with his throat. And so what he did, he started to, as you say, get the strings pulled, and poor Francis had to come back reluctantly back to live with Dr. Johnson. But again, the idea of him being poorly wasn't the real reason, I think, in my opinion, because if you were on a ship going out, because we're still in the time of slavery, and if you got yourself on a ship as a black person and you're out at sea and you're going to another country, you could be taken into slavery. There is references of people who were conducting were working with the Europeans in the slave business, and they were princes, African princes, who thought, let's go for a trip. And they went on a boat and found themselves enslaved. So, you know, it was a precarious situation to be in. As much as he was a free man or a free person, it was not likely that he would have been free if he'd gone somewhere else. So I think Dr. Johnson was doing this young man a favour. We'll now go to the cat. There you are. All right. So, how many of you have seen the cat? That's a good number of you, haven't you? Good. And for many people, and I will say to you, I took a group on a small little walk, and they'd never come into this square, and they were amazed to see this little sculpture of the cat, and who is he, indeed. But this is part of what we'll do, is we're thinking of walking out into the square. Hodge was a cat that very much stayed with Dr. Johnson, and he liked cats. He liked children as well, by the way. So, you know, it's similar in their attitudes. You've got to keep them, control them. Anyway. So, yes, so Hodge, what you see there, has been there because he liked cats. And interesting enough, the people after Samuel Johnson died that were friends of Samuel Johnson were very unkind to Francis. And they didn't trust Frank. They felt that he was taking advantage of Dr. Johnson, because it would be Dr. Johnson that would go out to get the food. And if you look, can you see there's some little roundels here? Yes? They're the oysters. All right? Fancy that, a cat having oysters, you know? But in those days, in the 18th century, oysters was for the masses, for the poor. All right? It wasn't just a luxury that we enjoy, or I don't enjoy because I can't afford it, but, you know, to have oysters. But then on the other, you'll see the phrasing here, a very fine cat indeed. All right? So it was the idea that Francis was seeing, the friends were thinking that he saw by feeding the cat or getting the cat food, it was beneath him. But it was Dr. Johnson that didn't want him to do that. He saw that as a menial task. And he saw that in a way, his servant, his friend, you know, this person who's taken care of, he didn't want him to do this. He felt it was demeaning. He didn't want him to do a lot of things. He didn't want him to buckle his shoes, you know, and to buy food for the cat. He thought, no, can't do that. So it was Boswell who sort of brought the attention to the fact that Samuel Johnson liked cats. And I'm going to quote something from Boswell's Life of Johnson, which we were talking earlier, is very hard to get through. Very hard to get through. Very intense. But I found the bit about the cats. It says the fondness he showed for animals, which he had taken under his protection. I never shall forget the indulgence with which he treated Hodge, his cat, for whom he himself used to go out and buy oysters, lest the servants having that trouble should take a dislike to the poor creature. I recollect Hodge one day scrambling up Dr. Johnson's breast, apparently with much satisfaction, while my friend, smiling and half whistling, rubbed down his back. He's a very fine cat, a very fine cat indeed. But there was another person who very much did not like Francis, Frank, and in a way was a bit, I use the word, a bit bitchy, yes, with him about it, and sort of wrote something after Samuel Johnson's death to show her contempt for him. So she really was talking about his her recollections of the cat, but really taking a dig at Frank. And she goes, Mr. Johnson always went out himself to buy Hodge's dinner, so that Francis, the black's delicacy, might not be hurt at seeing himself employed for the consequence of a quadruped. So that was her view, yes? Didn't see himself enough. But also other people were very sort of unhappy with Francis, and there was a man called John Hawkins who also wrote a book about Samuel Johnson, who wrote nastily about him, saying he was an undeserving servant. This is a man who is a servant, but is also a free man, you know. So they had not seen him in the sense of that he was more than just the servant that they're referring to. But ironically, just to add some balance, Johnson also described men in general as coming low, black men in general as coming low on the human chain of beings. But he expressed the highest opinion of Barber, on whom he came increasingly to depend. So, you know, there's still this issue around the value of people of colour. The cat that you see there, the sculptor John Bickley modelled it on his own pet cat called Thomas Henry. And he put it at a particular length, height, so that people can come and stroke it and cuddle it if they wanted to. There you go. But as I said, oysters now, can't afford them, but the cat had a good time when he had the food. So we're going to go next. This is James Boswell. Forgot to move. I'm not good, as I said, with presentations. I'm out there in the street, so do apologise. So that's James Boswell, and this is Mrs. Hester Thrale. Anybody from Streatham? Nobody from Streatham. Okay, there's a street called Thrale Road. So this is she remarried after her husband's death, became Mrs. Piozzi. But here we are. Familiar? Yes, the Cheshire. Anybody been in the Cheshire?
Yeah.
Yes, good pub, isn't it? So this is the ye old Cheshire Cat. So when I was doing the walk, I took them round to see the ye old Cheshire cheese, and none of them had been here. They'd been in Fleet Street, but they'd never seen it. Well, they may have seen it, but it just didn't cross their minds. And so they came and they saw it, and I took them around the side, and they could see this plaque here. And if you look, it says it was built in 1667 in the reign of Charles II. And this is where I shift a little bit now to talk about the black history and the sort of evolving trade that it was of the slave trade. Charles II set up a company called the Royal African Company. And it was, very African company was there to basically deal with Africa in gold and slaves. And his brother James, who later became James II, he was the Duke of York. He also was in that company, and he bought slaves, and he had them branded with D-O-Y, Duke of York. So there you have something that will tell you that the royals were very much involved in the business of buying people and putting them to work. But also, if you look down, you will see George II and George III. So Francis was living between these, you know, in the eras of these two kings. So slavery very much was still a trade that was going. And we also have George III, where there was the war with those in the Americas in terms of the independence, War of Independence. And there were many black people of colour, the enslaved, that went to the British because they believed that they would then, if they were fighting against the people who wanted to have independence, that they would be given freedom. So they were given those promises. And I will say to you, the Royal Navy in the 18th century was very cosmopolitan. It had free men, it had enslaved. They took the enslaved from the Caribbean. Nelson, didn't have a problem with that, but it was, these were the times in which Francis Barber was living. So we'll see the slavery there. And then we're moving on to what were the bill posters that you might have seen in places like the Cheshire, the old Cheshire, where they're looking to promote the idea of selling and finding. So here we have a sign saying, to be sold, a pretty little Negro boy about 9 years old and well limbed. It is not disposed of. If not disposed of, is not disposed of, to be sent to the West Indies in 6 days' time. He is to be seen at the Dolphin Tavern in Tower Street. And when I looked it up, I could find the location. It's near to Bywood Street, just on the junction. That's where the pub would be. It's now a modern building there. You won't see it again. But it just tells you that there was people buying and selling here in London. Here's another poster of somebody that's fled their master, but it's an East Indian mulatto. Again, aged 14 years old, 4 feet 4 inches in stature. A clerk of Messrs. B. Burton, Forbes and Gregory of Aldermanbury. So again, city. So you're starting to see that, the business of trying to get these people back. They can't call them slaves, they can't call them other than the names, because there was no slavery here in this country. So, oops, let me go back one, sorry. So we've got Susanna Hayes, that is the ship, and he's looking for a black Negro slave that has more likely done a bunk, aged 28, because the clue really is because he speaks French and Portuguese with a little broken English. And if you do find him, bring him back to Horsley Downstairs, which is further upriver on the River Thames. So you're starting to see these pubs also are there for people who are not just chatting, but also trying to get them to see who, if anybody knows them. And the last one here, ran away last night and supposed gone for London. 2 Negro fellas, one named Waterford, 18 years, stout and well set, about 5 feet 6 inches high, has very large lips and speaks very thick. And there's another young one, the other named Julius Caesar. I laughed slightly in that when I thought it, but it's not funny. It's just that they named them some ridiculous names, like pets. It's just not nice. And he's about 15 years old, hardly 5 feet high, a very thin, slender boy, but he was able to speak very good English, having spent several years in Virginia, that's in America. So you can see the people coming from various places being brought here, because many people who came as the enslaved, they believed as they were coming that once they landed on British soil, that they would be free. And equally, to prove that they were decent people, they'd be looking to be christened as well. So this is the world that Francis Barber was living in. He was meeting people who were looking at him, he's looking at them. They may have a good life, they may not have a good life, but that's the world that he inhabited. So, this is the pubs, the old Cheshire pub. The old Cheshire would have been where Samuel Johnson would have been. They say he had one of the rooms there, but he had the Mitre across the road that he went to. For the black people, they had their own taverns. But I'm going to show you a clip from a newsletter. This is dancing. Can you see the lowest life in London? All right, these taverns where people met. They may well be different sexes and ethnicities, but they were coming together. But the mark is the lowest life in London, Tom and Jerry, and the artist Crookshank. And you've got on the far right, you see a little baby being kept there, and the lady is dancing. And you've got a gentleman playing with his instrument, being helped to drink by another person. But as you go around, you can see a variety of people. But they were seen as the lowest because they were engaging and not necessarily as the highest society would have liked. But the pubs there's a comment in one newspaper, the London Chronicle, about a tavern that was being exclusively sort of used by black people in London. And this is the one that I wanted to show you, where it says, among the sundry fashionable routs or clubs that are held in town, that of the blacks or Negro servants is not the least. On Wednesday night last, no less than 57 of them, men and women, supped, drank, and entertained themselves with dancing and music, consisting of violins, French horns, and other instruments. And this was at a public house in Fleet Street till 4 in the morning. No whites were allowed to be present, as all the performers were blacks. So it just shows you what was happening there. And there was a case in 1772 of Somerset versus Stuart that was being heard in Westminster. And again, we're talking in the time of Francis. So he may well have heard this, the stories or the comments, because he was in the midst of philosophers, politicians, artists, all of those people when his master was amongst these groups. And if you were to look in the life of Boswell and start to list the number of people that he was associated with, my goodness, it was hundreds, of people that he knew that were of standing, politicians, that very much would have had their views, whether they were for slavery or not for slavery. But Francis, I'm sure, would have been listening to comments and taking his cues as to what people were thinking, even about himself. And the Somerset case, they've got an article, news article here where it says, on Monday, nearly 200 blacks with their ladies had an entertainment at a public house in Westminster to celebrate the triumph with which their brother Somerset, that's James Somerset, had obtained over Mr. Stuart, his master. Lord Mansfield's health was echoed around the room, and the evening was concluded with a ball. And the tickets for admittance to this black assembly were 5 shillings each. And this comes from the public advertised the 27th of June, 1772. So again, this is a young man. Somerset was brought back. He was taken from Africa. He was taken to the Caribbean and ferried around. And then he decided he'd arrived in England. This is freedom. This is what I want. All right. So he escaped, and his master wanted him back. But it was Granville Sharp who basically went to, he was using this as a test case because he'd already done one for another young man against his master who wanted to take him and cruelly saying, right, you've had an opportunity to work in the house, you're going back to the West Indies, I'm going to put you in the plantations, which means your life is going to be hell. And that's what they knew. They had to keep their, be careful about what they were doing, knowing that the threat of being basically turned out or taken back to the West Indies. So he would have been very much aware of all of this. And whether he had a comment or not, we don't know, because everything we get about Francis comes through those people that Boswell, had, conversations with. Because Francis was asked to collect all the papers, because Boswell knew that his dear friend was on his way out and thinking, let's get ready, let's make sure we have everything, just in case. And this is why you see the book, it's so condensed, it's got so much in it. But again, if you look at some of the names, Francis Barber would have been around and you would have heard those conversations about slavery and the attitude towards black people. As I said, they did not like Francis. And there was one occasion with John Hawkins when he came thinking that Samuel was at home, and door opens, he sees Frank, and he says, okay, so he's not at home. And he looks down the hallway and he sees these black faces looking back at him with big smiles, and he realized something is very wrong, thinking that Samuel Johnson is clearly got a man who cannot be trusted to have, to have his interests at heart, which is totally wrong. He's entitled to have friends, and he's not going to sort of undo any trust that he has with Johnson. But we're going to speak of good times for Frank now, and I'm going to show you this lovely place, Old St. Dunstan's. Have you been to St. Dunstan's in the West? Yes? This is the former St. Dunstan's, and this is where Frank gets married. And this is the quote. Barber proved an attractive young man, and this is what Johnson said. Frank has carried the empire of Cupid farther than most men, and after returning from Lancashire in 1764, where the lad had so impressed the local girls that Mrs. Piozzi asserted that one followed him back to London. And on the 28th of January 1773, he married Elizabeth Bourne. She lived in London, so she wasn't from Lincolnshire, she was from here, and she got baptised. It's important to tell you where they got baptised, St Andrews, Holborn. And she was just a little bit younger than him, but they eventually had, over time, they had 5 children. But when they got married in Old Dunstans, it wasn't a big fanfare, they just got married. And then came out, it's like a lunchtime wedding, came out and went back to work. But it was the comments that they got from being a mixed race family that was troublesome, because they got the heat from all around, whether it be their neighbours or from other people. And even Mrs. Thrale could not bring herself to call his wife by her name. She just felt that she had fallen so low in her estimations. And she just looked and basically said, this is not what she was expecting. No decent woman would be marrying a black man. But over time, they had their children. But if you're at St Dunstan's, this is the building that you recognise. If some of you who haven't seen it, this is the new building that was built in the 1830s. And you have there one of the, I think, only one statue of Elizabeth I. So when you're going past on the bus, you might see the statue there. But further down the road is something that more than likely Francis would have seen. This is Temple Gate, right? It used to be there on Fleet Street. Have any of you now seen it where it is now? Yes? For those of you who don't know where it is, if you go to St Paul's Cathedral, you're facing it, and you go a little bit further along, and there it is, the gateway into Paternoster Square. And what you will see at the front here is definitely Charles I and Charles II, so father and son. And on the other side is James I of England and Anne. But this is a very, in comparative, is a modern picture. But it's just to let you know, when people are walking around, they'll see the church, but they won't necessarily know what Francis would have seen in his time. Those gates, they moved those gates because there was problem with traffic, and it was taken down, given to a very wealthy person that wanted to put it in his own garden. He dies, and his wife is left with all these stones and rubble, and then they gave it back to the city for £1. Yes? Mm-hmm. And then it cost them nearly £3 million to put it back. So this is Samuel Johnson. So if you continued past the Temple Gate, you'd come to St Clement's Danes. And I thought, let me just show some of you, because I haven't put his picture in, let me just show you this statue of him. And interesting enough, on the pedestal, there is the images of Mr. and Mrs. Thrale, because they were dear friends to him, but he had a falling out with them, but they very much featured in his life. He used to travel down to Streatham, he enjoyed going out to the countryside. But again, it is to say to you that he valued Francis, he really did, because in a way, he was not a son, but he felt that he needed to treat him kindly and take care of him. He wanted him to have a good education, as we heard earlier, learn to read and write and to be eloquent. And so he was taught when he came to this country, the basics, and then Samuel Johnson decided at the age of 28 he should go back to school. And he went back to school, but he ended up in a schoolroom with children. Imagine sitting there, you're the adult amongst children. But what Johnson was trying to do, again, they did tend to look at black people, despite their age, as young people, children. Yes? They sort of infantilized them a lot. And even Granville Sharp, a hero, Wilberforce, a hero, looked at black people as young people. They had no sense. Let's help them, rather than encourage education and make them, be as competent as others would be. But for Samuel Johnson, very much his right-hand man, and they got to know each other very well in terms of their idiosyncrasies. We're going to go back down Fleet Street to one of the courts that is here, Johnson Court. And if you go along this street, on Fleet Street on the north side, you'll see a lot of these alleyways with the little plaques that tell you what that court is about. And many of them are for the printing, the newspapers. And in this case, we're looking at Johnson Court here. I tried to read it. The only bit I got was OBE, and on the other side OBL. And I couldn't read it because the inscription is very bad. But if you can do it, well done. But this is Johnson's Court today. There used to be a house there where Samuel Johnson lived. And so you'll see on the right-hand side, so I'm putting in the direction so you know when you go around the corner, just come out of here and you won't see it because it's tucked in a corner. It says on this side, Dr. Johnson lived between 1765 and 1776. But he moved around, and more than likely Francis had to just go to work wherever Johnson was living. But the place where he and Francis ended up living together is a place called Bulk Court. And I was looking for something very historical, and they ended up with Elvis is dead. All right? But what it is where the Sun, and it's amazing, last year, imagine, the Sun is 60 years old, yes? Because it replaced the Daily Herald. So it was first printed, the Sun, 15th of September, 1964. My goodness. I always say, when is it going to be a nuclear war? They'll be busy reading the newspaper, looking at page 3 and thinking what's going on, you know. So, yes, but King Elvis is dead. But Bulk Court is where Samuel Johnson lived, and then Francis needed to come and stay there, and the whole family, him and the wife and the 5 children came. There was 2 other ladies living there, and it became what I refer to as a menagerie. All right, and Francis Barber didn't mind having these people there. He just got on with reading and writing and doing his dictionary. But for them, sometimes there were lots of quarrels, and he had to sort of work out how to resolve it. But they say more than often there was quarrels about Francis and his family, but he always sided with Francis or Frank. So we've moved down now, down the street. And again, this is a church that is hidden away because of all those high-rise buildings. It's only when you go down, you just get a glimpse of it. If you're coming down towards Ludgate Hill, that you see a little alley and then you think, oh, and it's gone. And it is St. Bride's Church. And St. Bride's Church was dedicated to St. Bridget, and it was, what you see is the building that was done by Sir Christopher Wren. And it is a beautiful church to go in. It's the journalist church, just for that little bit of fun. This is where Rupert Murdoch got married. Yes, to, what's her name, Jessie? Jerry Hall, yes? Didn't go well. But anyway. So this is a wonderful church to go in. It's got history that goes back in terms of the Romans that were there. And again, I say to people when they're looking at black presence in this country, Africans have been here since the Roman times. And it's the Arabians that were guarding the border between Scotland and England. So this black presence equally has to be acknowledged. You know, that it's more than just 1948 in the dictionary, in the history books. But what they discovered in their records, in their parish records, came out of a sort of exercise done by the Metropolitan Archives and an exhibition that they had called Unforgotten Lives that dealt with black presence in London, and it was a fantastic, really fantastic exhibition. I went around taking photographs of literally everything, because what we don't know, you don't know until somebody shows it to you. And that's what I love about my job. And what we have here with the Unforgotten Lives are a few of the people, not all of them that would have been known to Francis, not at all, it's not about that. But because in the time that Francis was here, there was about 20,000 black people living in London, working in various forms. So, but what they found in their parish records, and sometimes their names there, but their ethnicity hasn't been made clear. There was a Daniel Coventry baptised at St. Bride's on the 28th of September 1783, who was described as a Negro man aged about 27 years. Sarah Underwood, who was said to be a Negro girl from Demerara, about 16 years of age, residing at One Dove Court, New Street Hill. So, you know, they are there. And the earliest record that the rector could find dates back to the 23rd of May, 1672, with the baptism of Mary Black, described as a black. And the burial record dated 29th of December, 1691, and the records of a death of a Negro boy called William Adams, who clearly died tragically young. So whatever information they had was there. But again, it's giving you a chance to see a church, and if you look at the spire, that's influenced a lot of wedding cakes, all right, because it's tiered. But this is one of the, when I took the walk the first time round, I started at Marks and Spencer's, that's no longer there. All right, that was a shock. Because I was ready to go and have a coffee and it's disappeared. But I went around because I wanted, because Fleet Street is very much now a place where a lot of development is going on, and you're losing the courtyards, you're losing these little medieval lanes, and it's making, you know, people aware of these little medieval lanes that they can walk through and appreciate the history of the city. And this is called Poppins Court, and there was a hostelry here from one of these religious people back in the 1400s. But again, it's had its name changed over time. But this alley, look at now that the building is gone, look at the view that you get, all right? And when you look, you're thinking, my goodness, it's not the best photograph because I took it, but it's just to sort of look and think, my goodness, there's history there. What are those buildings? Look at the design of those buildings. And then you've got the spire that is St. Bride's. But I'm going to finish, we're almost there, on a gentleman that will be on the streets there again. Look at these, all 19th century, by the way. The church again, but this is the gentleman I want to introduce you to, Charles McGee. How many of you heard of Charles McGee? No, I didn't know. But about 15 years ago, I saw the name, and then I wasn't a guide then. It just didn't happen. But if you look at the postcard first, can you see the obelisk? Yes. So that's where Charles McGee had set up his stall when he was a crossing sweeper. So in the days before the roads were clean and tarmacked, all right, you had the horses going through the muck and everything. He would be one of those crossing sweepers that would be employed. And they were used, you know, there were several people that you've got to work, you've got to find a way to earn an honest penny. And that's what they said, you know, what's Sultan say? They saw being a crossing street sweeper as the last chance left of obtaining an honest crust. And for Charles McGee, well, he's a black man. This is a very romantic look of him, because there's another picture from a book called The Vagabondia, and you see him, he doesn't look so good, yes, and one eye, you know, bit rough, but this is he. And he was born in Jamaica in 1744, and he also had been in the Navy, and the Navy made many promises to a lot of black men to say, once you come into England, you're free, and we'll give you a pension, you know, and you'll be able to work. Couldn't work. They weren't being given opportunities to work, and many of them found themselves on the streets and unable to basically survive. Many of them died of malnutrition or cold. But he had found this opportunity, and he was extremely well known, and he was one of the few black people in London, and he had a distinctive look, shock of fuzzy white hair, bunched at the back, sideburns, and one eye missing. And that's how, no one knows how, but he also had a little sort of smart frock coat. But he was also one of what they referred to as the St. Giles Blackbirds, because there was a rookery, just where Tottenham Court Road is, there was a rookery around that area, predominantly Irish, but then when the black people came and they were trying to flee and find somewhere to live, the rookery there, you know, took them in, took a lot of them in. But one of the story I want to tell you about him is that he constantly was cleaning these streets, and at times as he was getting older, suffering from the cold. And there was a young lady that was in this particular shop here that was known as Wraithman's, would come out and give him a hot drink, give him a blanket, and they got to be friends. And over time, you know, he looked upon her as a good person. And when he died, she didn't know about him. And then somebody came and said, this gentleman died, but he's left you something. And he'd left her £700. £700 in today's money is nearly £84,000. And people are saying, but why didn't he spend it? He couldn't. He's a black man. You can't go into Savile Row or those places and say, excuse me, my man, I'd like a suit. You're a black man. You are not of the standing. So he had this money, he couldn't use it. So he gave it to her. And so this is where, as I said, if you go back, so when you go to Marks and Spencer's on the corner now, all right, just imagine that obelisk there. and that was his parish. That's where he stood. All right, so Charles McGee. So again, I'm going to finish just with this gentleman here. Do anyone, you recognize him? It's not from round here, no. This is Cedric. Cedric is the great-great-great-grandson of Francis Barber. And in his family, they knew about him, and there was occasions when they didn't want to talk about him because he was black. But now, the family, much more enlightened, are proud to have him as their ancestor. So I put it here, Cedric Barber, descendant of, and the handwriting. When you had Celine talking about being up here in the garret, yes, while Francis Barber is writing his dictionary or writing his letters, there was Francis, like we all do, yes, practice our autograph, right, and there it is. So I'd like to thank you because I may more than likely run over time, I never am good at this, but I want to just tell you that this has been a lovely sort of opportunity to learn about Francis Barber and the time that he was in London. I think he was a very fortunate man. This is the book I had on the side. All right, I didn't go to it in a way to say, let me take everything out of this book. This is done by Michael Bundock. He's one of the trustees here at the house. All right, and this is an amazing book, very easy to read. Easier than Life of Boswell, of Life of Johnson. But I went and I checked everything that I wanted to say from my heart about him. I found it in here. Not this post. After I'd done what I wanted to do, I found it in here. All right, so I said we're on the same path, but different ways of working. So this is Francis Barber. This is his son, his great-great-grandson. And he was also here when they had a plaque put on the house as well. So he is very much part of that story now. And I hope that you also end up having, a walk around this area and discover not just about Francis Barber, but other people that may well be of interest to you as well. So I thank you for your patience. All right, and yes, that's me.
Would anybody like to ask Angela a question?
Angela, you mentioned about the woman who was very bitchy, really, about Francis Barber, but you didn't say her name.
Mrs. Thrale.
It was Mrs. Thrale,
yes,
was it?
Yes,
right.
yes. Because she, what had happened? She never liked Frank. Yes, she saw him as taking advantage of a man. If you know Samuel Johnson, he was a peculiar individual, when I say peculiar, he had his idiosyncrasies, and she thought that Francis was taking advantage. And when he died, she saw, she was able to let loose on how she felt about Frank, and equally found herself having to say that he was also a thief, because when Johnson died, everything that he had given. So in a sense, everything that he had in life, he was giving over to Frank. And some of those things that he was giving over were gifts that she had given him, and she wanted them back.
What about the other people in the household? Were there any other women in the household?
There was a lady called Mrs. Williams, and there was another lady called, I've forgotten her name, but there were several women that came, that he had a leg that was blind, and she didn't like Francis either, and so there was always quarrels. But somewhere along the line, Samuel wanted to keep Francis. It was like his son, but not his son, if you know what I mean. And they couldn't see this relationship. All they saw was a black young boy growing up, taking advantage, doing less than what they would expect a servant to do. And as I said, with Hawkins looking in the room and seeing all these black people at the back thinking, what the hell is going on here? It's like having a teenager at home. You said stay at home and all of a sudden they're having a party. It's that sort of moment. But I'm not understanding the relationship. I feel that the relationship wasn't understood by those who already carried prejudices. Because in Samuel Johnson's life, he was walking and talking and being, he had good friends who supported slavery, whilst he also had others that were anti-slavery, like himself. But as I said, the comment made about that, black people, men, the lowest rung, in a sense, was still part of the prejudice of black people. Yeah.
Angela, you have such a vast knowledge on this topic. What was the thing that surprised you most when you were researching this story afresh, this incredible story of Francis Barber?
What surprised me most was as I was doing the research, coming to the realisation that Francis was very fortunate.
Right.
When I say fortunate, it's, you know, when you look at some of the casework around the cases like Granville Sharp, you know, you had Jonathan Strong, you know, almost beaten to death by his master because he could do it. Yes, and then you've got the other case, the Somerset case, the Zone cases, you know, how people were being seen. And there's Francis Barber being given freedom, but he didn't take his freedom because this is a man that's taking care of him. And he could walk out into those streets and see people who were not as free as he could be. Because there was one occasion where near the end of Johnson's life, where he wasn't feeling very well, and he had been given an opportunity to see something that was very historic. That was the balloon flight in Oxford. And he said, no, you go in my place. You go in my place and see this. So he wanted to enlarge this young man. He didn't want to restrict him. And so there is, and for you and I that would go to Oxford, we now know, and I'll tell you, you know, Christchurch Meadows, you know, near to Christchurch. I can now look there and think, my goodness, somewhere in there, Francis Barber was watching something historical because his master, his friend, really and truly, we use the word master wrongly, I think, in this relationship, you know, allowed him to go and be in this stead and see something rather than just say, I'm not going, take me home. Yes, he goes, you go and have a look. And it was a historic event. So I think it was the realization that he was very fortunate. But he, you know, when you cross-reference it with Charles McGee, you know, they're still very much, you know, unable to be more than a black person, more than these lonely people. So I think Johnson, gave him a chance to enlarge his life. Sadly for Francis, though, when he was told that he would leave London, and he was advised to leave London after he got he got an annuity of £70, and he thought that's a lot of money, but he'd been given knowledge, but not necessarily the ways to live a life and live within his means and know who to trust and who not to trust. Because he had to rely on some of the friends that Samuel Johnson had, who didn't tell Samuel Johnson they didn't like him. Why has he got all this money? We're going to drip feed it, we're not going to give him all of it. But I think he was freer than many men in his time, men and women.
Would black people have been able to buy houses and that then? You said about Samuel McGee, so they wouldn't have been able to buy their own properties.
This man wouldn't have been of a level to be able to negotiate contracts, because if you reduce people to be, I'm going to say very crudely, amoebas, yes, they're not allowed to learn, you know, to read a book could be, you know, in America you could die, yes, people didn't see you as a human being, yes, so there were people who, by the fact that they were mixed race, and their people were of standing. So I know there are black people, there's mixed race men who became members of parliament, who also themselves owned slaves, because there's a culture of owning slaves. They were mixed race, but they had, their money was given to them so they could own a house. They didn't have to go out and buy a house. They were mixed race. So they were more fortunate than those who were darker. When it came to Granville Sharp and Wilberforce, all those men who had been in the army, all right, who'd been let down, and now on the streets, they made a decision, all right, well, we can't be here, you know, we need to send them home. Because they didn't see us as individuals, they didn't see us coming from any place. And so these people were sent away, not sort of absorbed into society, allowed to live next door to people. So I think the racism and the way that people view black people, in a way, made it that we were less than. So no, there wouldn't have been an opportunity. Imagine £82,000, you know, and you can't use it. Can't use it.
I thought after he was in aerospace, he set up his own business.
Sorry?
I thought after he had his inheritance, he set up his own business.
Who, Francis? He would have gone with the money that he got from Samuel Johnson on the first amount, from the last amount. Well, no, he may have set up a business, but you need people to come. He set up a school. people wouldn't go to the school because it was a black man. His wife couldn't keep the school going either because she'd married the black guy. So racism is part of the person who had a shop is Ignatius Sancho. You may be mixing up.
No,
Yeah.
it's not Sancho.
No.
Totally different. Yeah.
Right, no, but he was helped to get a shop. But for Frank, he was not successful in Litchfield. Racism and way that people viewed him, he wasn't lucky. He bad choices, poverty, people not giving you enough money at the right time, or even giving you good advice, is going to result in your struggle. Yeah. Don't worry. Do you know what? If you've got the information, I'm happy to be corrected. But from what I've
I
read,
just thought that was what happened. I thought someone from the house mentioned about it.
possibly, but I don't remember a business. But as I said, I didn't go through. Instead of a school, yeah, that's it. He wasn't successful. Yes, that's it. Yeah. All right. So, do you want to
Just one more question.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I wondered how we could go on a further talk of yours about how
So let me do this. That's me. I'm not good at promoting myself. All right, I do a lot of talking, but so what I tend to tell people to do, go on my Instagram account, because that's where you will get to know me better than just looking at Guide London, which is an association. One of my colleagues is here. You know that we're all on the same. You know, we're blue badge guides. I'm a Clerkenwell guide as well as Lambeth guide now. So I like knowing history. I like finding out things, and it's. I learn from yourselves as well as I give out information. So it's important that we share rather than compete. For our knowledge. But yes, so Instagram, Angela Morgan 365. I didn't choose the title. I got the name right, but they put the 365 on. That's exactly who I am. 365 days of the year I'm learning. And sometimes I feel as if I'm working that way as well. But I do tours. I do more private tours than I do public tours. Because it is what it is out there in that world. But I'm glad that you know some of what I'm saying, because that's what we're trying to do, make people be aware of the history of London, be aware of the backgrounds of some of the things that you see, because there's assumptions made around black history. It is British history. We should not be separating it out, and we should also be acknowledging some of what I call the difficult truths, all right, and say them and discover more about things. I say I have a lot of international people that come with an assumption that all we are kings and queens and Winston Churchill. We are more than that. So it is trying to embrace a little bit more of who we are as a city, and also in other areas as well. So that is who I am. All right. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela.